The IMF just released a series of forecasts for growth and a lot more optimistic this time as to how Africa will grow this year, 5.5%, 6% next year. What's going to drive that growth? So far it's been a commodities story.
Well, Africa is continuing to recover from the recession of 2008-2009. What helped Africa deal with the crisis was, of course, much better macroeconomic policies, fiscal space created through very hard work by those governments, and debt relief that helped respond to the crisis. And Africa, of course, is also benefiting from high commodity prices this year and probably next year as well. And that has propelled a growth impetus in the continent.
But the caveat, though, is that we're starting to see global inflation creeping through. Higher oil prices, fuel prices, higher food prices. And there is a concern that it could undo a lot of those gains we've seen in growth. Is that something the IMF is concerned about?
It is a challenging year for sub-Saharan Africa, just having gone through the global recession, being hit for a second time now with the food and fuel crisis, after having used up a lot of the fiscal room they had. So, of course, there are countries who are very interested in putting in place targeted initiatives to mitigate the impact on the poor, which is very justified. And they have to find the room to do that. And at the same time, they also have to start the process of rebuilding their buffers so that they're able to deal with a future crisis. So that is a very challenging mixture of things in a very political year for Africa as well, with 17 plus elections. And so managing those tensions is going to be another challenge.
For you at the IMF, how do you approach this counter-cyclical policy priority that you've identified? The fact that in this era of scarcity, governments are spending at an unprecedented level, and it's creating a huge deficit for many economies, and many having to dip into their reserves, many having to incur a lot more debt.
It's true that in response to the crisis we saw across sub-Saharan Africa, for the first real time, efforts at counter-cyclical policy on the fiscal side, and some countries on the monetary side as well. And that was very helpful, and that was exactly the sort of thing that needed to be done. There's still a need for counter-cyclical policy at this stage, as oil prices are so high. Oil producers have an opportunity to rebuild their savings, and that's exactly what they ought to be doing. And to find a room to, at the same time, in the case that they're net importers of food, for example, to spend some resources mitigating the impact on the poor. You can look at a budget and find areas that are less priority than that objective, and certainly try to restructure your budgets to do that.
The IMF's been critical of some countries and their monetary policy approach, arguing for further tightening with rising inflation, and some countries saying, yes, there may be a need for tightening, but there's also a need for growth, and we need to keep interest rates subdued in order to support growth. What's your approach to those?
Well, in light of the pressures, the inflationary pressures, it is very important indeed that countries start the process of tightening on the monetary policy side to really contain those inflationary pressures. There's certainly a need for capital to continue to be provided to industry and other economic activities to continue to grow. But those interest rates, in any case, can be negative, and they will not elicit much in the way of financial institutions lending when you have negative interest rates, and if you have unbelievable inflation out there, that's what you're going to have. So you need to balance those things and to manage it appropriately.
Talking about investment flows, we're seeing an increased figure, absolutely, but there's still concerns of volatile currencies, fluctuating exchange rates, and weak capital controls. What could we do better?
Do better in terms of...
In Africa, just generally, in terms of trying to attract investment and developing our capital markets?
Well, there's certainly a need for continuing to improve the overall environment for private activity, and so working to put in place structural reforms that will continue to make for a more attractive, enabling environment is important. The financial sector needs to be looked at and worked upon to make sure that where there are vulnerabilities, that those vulnerabilities are addressed and that the financial sector grows in a way that is supportive of economic activity. And those are priorities, we think, in the future, at the time when governments are also rightly focused on improving the quality of growth so that they can provide more jobs and address social needs.